You're listening to the Healthy Creative Ministry podcast with Matt Curtis. This is the podcast that helps you take your creative ministry from wherever you are today to healthy and effective.
How do I get my pastor to plan ahead? Now, this is a very appropriately timed episode because it's dropping the day after Easter. Now, if your Easter or even your Good Friday or anything within Holy Week wasn't full of last-minute surprises, then I would say that you had a bit of an abnormal experience. This is the seasons like this, Easter, Christmas, they tend to be this way, but also throughout the year. There's just a lot of these last-minute things. And it usually boils down to us feeling like leadership, our pastor, the different ministry leaders, whoever it is that's asking us for projects, they're just not good at planning ahead. So what do? Do we just accept it and adopt a perpetually unhealthy pace in our ministry? Is that the right answer? Or is there something else we can do? Well, before I give you some guidance here in terms of things that you can do, there are things you can do. I want to make it very clear there is no silver bullet. At the end of the day, your pastor has to decide to embrace planning ahead or they won't plan ahead. It really is that simple. Now, that feels a little bit demoralizing because we want them to embrace it. There is a right answer in our minds. And I would argue that many churches actually remain small because their leadership, their pastors, their ministry leaders refuse to get better in this area, and it is actually an inhibitor of growth. And the reason it is an inhibitor of growth is because as you get bigger, more people are involved in every decision that's made. So if you're a small church and it's just your pastor and nobody else on staff are helping out, they can have an idea at the last minute and then they can execute. That's it. They just need to have the idea and execute. This is similar for me. I'm running a business. I'm the only employee. So I have an idea and then I just execute. I don't have to make sure anybody else is on board. I don't have to give clear instructions to anybody, and I don't have to allow anybody else time in order to execute what it is that I desire to see accomplished. When you have a church that's larger than just one person, now all of a sudden you need to make sure that other people are involved early enough so that they're able to execute all of the things that need to get done. And it's not just creative. If you have 2 services, you need somebody to go through and clean the auditorium or the worship center or the sanctuary in between services. You need lead time for that. So you can't book your next service right after your first one without some margin. And then you need other people to know how much margin that is. And in most cases, you need those people who are the experts to be able to speak in and make a good decision about what that margin should be. So anything that you do as you grow in size and in complexity requires more time. And when you have something that requires more time, it requires better planning ahead. So while we can't force planning ahead, there are absolutely things that we can do to make it easier to plan ahead. And I would argue, make it more attractive to plan ahead. So there are some things that you can do in order to make planning ahead feel less daunting. The first thing that I always recommend is identify projects where planning ahead would be most helpful and then initiate that first meeting. I know it may sound like a wild idea that ministry leaders forget about some of the major events that happen, but it's true. The day-to-day of ministry has a lot of distractions baked into it. That's just the nature of that type of a role. You not only have the common experience or the common, Sunday's coming kind of a thing. Yeah, you have your weekends, they're coming, so they demand a degree of attention. But you have all of these different variables that are unforeseen. You have loss in the congregation. You have people coming in who need counseling. You have really complex issues sometimes that come in. You have pastor on call or pastor of the day types of things, people who are not even a part of your church family coming to the church and asking for something. You have internal complexities, staff having issues, problems even internally, whether that be congregation or staff. There's a lot of different things you're trying to navigate. We haven't even talked about the fact that little Jimmy has baseball practice at 3:00. Like, there's so many layers to a schedule in ministry. There's just a lot of different ways things can go sideways. And when that happens, we sort of train our minds to navigate last-minuteness. We try to be nimble. We try to be flexible. We try to be able to pivot in whichever way demands our attention, I guess, the loudest. That reality makes it really difficult to get ahead of some of these larger events that require a couple months of planning. And so for us in creative ministry, we have a very unique opportunity to identify when those things are coming and then begin the conversation in a timely manner. We actually control the beginning of when the conversation happens. Something that I think is a very simple setup type of a solution that can really help us out. If you tend not to be administrator minded, this is a really simple solution. Create an annual calendar. I like to do it on the computer and put alerts. Put the alerts 2 months out. Whatever the planning time is that's necessary. Maybe for Christmas, do 6 months out or 4 months out. Whenever you feel is a reasonable amount of time to be able to plan ahead and to be able to invest in the planning for that big event. And then when those alerts go off, initiate the conversation with your pastor or whoever it is that's leading that conversation. Maybe there's a particular ministry leader who's in charge of a certain thing. And it's not a heavy-handed type of an email or swinging by their office. It's as simple as, hey, I have an alarm that's set up and it let me know that Easter is however many months away. And so I just want to get it on your radar and see if there was a way that we could connect to see if you had any initial ideas. So what you're doing here is you're prompting the planning ahead, where we often develop honestly a pretty bad attitude. We develop a bad attitude because we expect that other people should be good at planning ahead. But like any skill, not everybody's good at it. Some people are better at planning ahead than others. And so when we own the fact that we have the opportunity to make this problem better in the organization, it actually transforms a lot for us. This really feeds into the next point, which is manage reality. You have to recognize that everything's not going to be perfect. There's just too many moving parts and there are too many variables. Like even I mentioned with the minister's schedule, the pastor's schedule. There's so much uncertainty and unavoidable, unexpected disruption. That's just a part of what it means to be in ministry. So as you're desiring to plan ahead, you do need to manage reality. You need to understand, okay, this is the nature of the beast. We have a very complex schedule that we're trying to manage. There's a lot of uncertainty. Ministry leaders are busy and focused on other things. So it won't be perfect. And there's a degree of you have to get over that. That's okay that it won't be perfect. Because if you set unrealistic expectations, especially about planning, really about anything, but specifically about planning, you're just going to be frustrated all the time. Every time things don't go the way that you wish they would or that you think they should, your response will be, I'm frustrated, disappointed, let down, and it's just going to wear on you over time. So instead, set realistic expectations, and what you'll begin to see is actually, we did better this year on Christmas. We did better this year on Easter. We got a little bit further ahead, and that made it better for everybody who's involved. So managing reality is a really critical step when it comes to even helping your pastor plan ahead. We start with identify some of these projects. What are the things that you can initiate? That's the first point. Second, you got to manage reality. You got to be balanced here in the expectations that you have. Because if you over-expect that everyone's perfect at this all of a sudden, you're just going to be let down and frustrated. The third thing here, find or develop tools that can help make planning easier. The reality is that you don't have to do all this stuff on your own. Personally, I find that it's a lot easier to edit a plan rather than just build one from scratch, especially when you're in a really busy season or you're in the nature of ministry, this ongoing pace. So rather than just starting from scratch and trying to write some of this stuff down, look around and see if there are other industries, other churches, other places where this type of problem exists and then how they solve it. So a really practical example, we were really struggling in our church with getting ahead on sermons. We would have a sermon idea or a sermon series idea, and the communications team just didn't have enough time to plan ahead to execute. we weren't made aware of the details far enough in advance. And to be totally honest, the series just weren't getting planned far enough in advance. We would ask questions like, okay, what's the series about? And all we would get is, this is the title, and we still aren't sure what it's about. Well, that led us to create very generic graphics, and it prohibited us from being able to create effective invite pieces for our congregation. And so we were really stuck. We just couldn't make a lot of progress. And so one of the teaching pastors and I sat down, and we created the sermon series development plan. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, so check it out if this is something that might be helpful to you. But basically what we did is we just created a document that walks through all of the different phases of building a series, a sermon series. So we went as far as saying you start with a series type. This establishes the general direction of where we're heading. And then we listed what are different types of series. We had series that are growing your affection for God, growing your Christ-like character, growing your knowledge of God's truth, and growing your actions, your active love for others. So those were the 4 major categories. Those were born out of the church's values, mission statement, all the things that we cared about as a ministry. That's what drove those types of series. And then we said, it's a really good idea to establish a series goal. This pinpoints where we're headed, who we're trying to reach, and what success looks like. And then we articulated that a little bit further. What's the bottom line? What's the single goal of the series in one sentence? What are some measurable goals? What are the things that you want people to do with this information? This helps us assess success. Are we doing things that are effective? Are they working at accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish? Who's our target audience? Who are we trying to reach in the midst of this series? Then we said that biblical context is the next thing that you need to plan. We want to identify the content that we will exegete for the series. The next is the sermon series theme. What is the theme of all of this? Does it fit under a certain idea? Is there a particular context? Is there even a current world event or circumstance culturally that we're trying to speak to? We should put that in this document. And then finally, let's break it down. What are we going to talk about each week? And how does each week's topic or passage or whatever, how is this driving us toward the goal of what we're trying to accomplish in this sermon series? So what we do in this document, in this development plan, is we present a plan ahead guide. That's really all it is. We're saying these are the things that we need to be thinking about, so let's start thinking about those things. So here's what I found particularly interesting. When this was presented, it was shot down in a pretty big way. However, it was revised. The shooting down was, no, this isn't what we're looking for. But let me make some changes to this, and then we'll get there. We'll get to what we're looking for. So at the end of the day, our goal was accomplished. We were trying to help leadership formulate a strategy and a plan toward developing a sermon series. And that's what we were able to accomplish. So when you do this, when you find a plan, and I mean, legitimately, this is a free download. It's intentionally designed and provided so that you can use this exact document to drive this conversation. Give it to leadership. And don't frame it as, hey, I found the answer. You guys are bad at this. Here is the solution. Instead, say, I came across this sermon series development plan. I wanted to pass it along. I think it might be helpful. I know for me, it would be really helpful to have information like this so that I can make sure that I'm creating graphics, support material, communications material, productions stuff, worship ideas, whatever it is that you do creatively. It can align better with what we're teaching. That's a pretty reasonable request to say, I think that these things would be helpful. I found a plan that you can either use or just for inspiration for you. What you're doing is you're planting the seed that this is a helpful thing and that this is important. And then I recommend following up with a conversation. Swing by their office and say, hey, I just want to make sure you got that series development plan. It looks like a really cool thing. I know that you guys have your plan or your system for doing it, but I just wanted to share this with you in case it's helpful. I know for me, reiterate what you're saying in the original email. I know for me, this would be really helpful stuff so that I really want to make sure that our visual material, our communications, our stage, our worship, I want to make sure that all of these things are really moving our people in the same direction. And I think something like this could really help. So in a way, you're casting vision, but I would argue more importantly, you're actually providing them something to react to. And that's the power of finding something. Now, if you look at this document and you say, well, I don't think this works at all. Okay, great. Then you can use it as something to begin refining and editing and making your own. That's excellent. Do it. But having a starting point just saves everybody a lot of time. If you can't find a starting point, okay, then maybe block out some time and invest in building a plan from scratch that is a version 1 recommendation to leadership. But there are a lot of tools out there. I actually have a ton of them on my site. A big part of what I'm trying to do as I'm focused on helping churches build a healthy creative ministry, it's providing some of these structural tools that I wish I had over time. So I'm just building them all. And I'm making the vast majority of them for free. Some of them, like the course, the Healthy Communication Ministry Blueprint, that was a much, much bigger project. And so that's a paid course, but it'll answer every question that you have about communications. So in my mind, that's a helpful exchange. It'll save you more time than it costs. Like, it will save you so much time in that it directs you in the right way. But regardless, there's a ton of resources that you can check out on the resources section of the website. So do it. Look through all of them. Download every single one of them, even all the free ones. That's fine. And then begin integrating them into what you're doing, presenting the right ones to leadership, that are appropriate for that conversation. But start with something, because that actually makes it easier for leadership to begin embracing this idea of planning ahead. The next thing I want to really kind of focus on here is call out when planning ahead actually helps. I know this may sound silly, but when people are not good at planning ahead, they usually can't see the benefit of planning ahead. And so one of the things that you can do is, as you see the win of planning ahead, this, knowing about this event really let us do these things, call it out, celebrate and identify the fact that planning ahead was the catalyst that allowed us to accomplish what we accomplished. We actually encountered this quite a bit in small groups, because our small groups pastor, he was excellent at planning ahead. He was maybe one of the most administrative staff people on staff. And what would happen every year is we would do a big fall launch. And every year we would have the information way ahead of time. Or even if it wasn't way ahead of time, we at least were informed that this stuff was coming, and we had deep conversations about what he wanted to accomplish. This really let us flex the power of our creative ministry. And when your creative ministry has the time to be able to flex its power or its strengths or its gifts, its creativity, the result is incredible compared to what you get from a last-minute project. Because this is the tension. When you do good work, people will come to you at the last minute and they'll really appreciate the work that you did. And they will be content with the quality of the work that you're doing. The issue is that you know that it can be so much better, but they don't. And in some cases, they don't care. So what you need some contrast that really shows, no, this is what we're capable of. Sure, we can turn around a postcard in 30 minutes, but if you give us 3 weeks, this is what we can do. And so this project every year really became the showpiece of that. One year we created a starter kit for new small groups. And we actually built a little box and we put a bunch of resources in there that guided their first 6-week study. And it really helped them get acclimated. When leadership and other ministry leaders saw the caliber of what we put together, in a lot of ways, they were shocked. They're like, whoa, how do we get something like this? And so then we got to say, this was such a win because small group pastor planned ahead. Because we had time, we were able to research. We were able to see what other churches were doing. We were able to study. We were able to really invest in solving creative problems. And this is the result. So all of a sudden now, people began recognizing, wow, if I give further notice, or if I give enough notice ahead, this is going to get a much better result. Celebrate it. Call it out when planning ahead works. And one little note on this, we often are frustrated because we want everybody to plan ahead. You're not going to get there from where you are today. If nobody's planning ahead, you aren't going to get to everybody plans ahead. So what I recommend is actually find the closest ministry to planning ahead. So this is maybe the most administrative minded. Maybe it's a friend, somebody you have a good relationship with, and you can have a really blunt conversation about this stuff. Some ministry leader who really wants to move the ball down the field in their ministry is willing to take some risks. Start with one. Let that one begin to be the prototype of what this looks like across the organization. You can't win every battle at once. Start with one, and then as you begin making more progress, others will want to participate. So start with the one, build a really strong rhythm of planning ahead, show off the work that's being created, and then invite another one into the fold. And then the last one here, I mentioned this a little bit before, but do as much of the planning work as you can. We do get so frustrated when others aren't good at planning, and we expect everybody to be good at planning. It's just not that way. It's like any skill. Everybody's not good at it. And I would actually say sometimes we spend so much time complaining that it actually would have been more efficient for us to just use our time planning for them. So don't get so caught up in the complaints of wishing it was different. Instead, use that energy to actually start making it be different. This was a real struggle for me for many years. I didn't want to help ministry leaders plan ahead almost out of bitterness because I thought they should be better at it. It's a really short-sighted way to address the problem because all I was doing was making it more complicated for me in the long run and in the short run. Every way possible, it just wasn't helping. Rather than spending so much of your energy being frustrated that others aren't good at planning, invest in planning as much as you're able to. In some cases, that might even be empowering people that you work with that either are on your team or that you work alongside, empowering them because they're already good at planning ahead. Maybe it means developing a team of volunteers who are really good at planning ahead. Maybe it means getting some of the things off of your plate that prevent you from leaning into planning ahead. But when we just go around and blame everyone else for the fact that we're not planned ahead, it's actually us ignoring an opportunity to serve the organization well. So let me challenge you a little bit here to look for opportunities where you can lean in and you can help both your pastor and the organization get better at planning ahead. And that's how I would answer the question, how can I get my pastor to plan ahead?
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Healthy Creative Ministry Podcast. This podcast is just one of the ways Lunchtime Heroes can help you build a healthy creative ministry in your church. Stay up to date on the latest by signing up for the Creative Bites email at lunchtimeheroes.co.